What's going on, fellow 3D printing Tinkercad enthusiasts? I am getting some major nostalgia feels right now because if you don't know, I was the original creator of the Tinkercad tutorial complete guide. These videos became very popular, and many schools, especially during the pandemic, were using my resource to teach their classes. With that being said, let's cover absolutely every new feature, old feature. We're gonna start from scratch, everything from the beginning to the advanced features. So let's start right here. If you go in this top left and you click the Tinkercad logo, it will simply take you to tinkercad.com. This right here is going to show you all of your recent designs if you click that. Now, this name right here, Tinkercad, automatically just populates a unique, gnarly name, but you can always change it. For instance, I can just change this to Tinkercad Tutorial. So on the right hand side, you have a drop down here where initially it says basic shapes. But if you select it, you can see that you can choose from a whole lot of different figurines. You can select hardware, you can select electronics, you could even select fun and games. So for instance, in order to grab any item that you see here and drag it onto the Workplane, all you do is you click on the item, you drag it over, you click again. Now, for the purpose of Tinkercad in this tutorial, I implore you to use a mouse. Now, I know a mouse isn't the coolest thing these days. People don't use mouse. It's all touchpad. You can try this with touchpad, but it's a lot easier with a mouse. And so for this tutorial, I'm going to cover a lot of shortcuts, and it will be extra helpful if you have a mouse so that you can follow along. But if you don't have one, that's okay as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag out a couple of items and place them anywhere on the Workplane. Remember, all you do is you hover over the object, and then it'll tell you what the object is. I mean, this is obvious, it's a cylinder. If you click it, you drag it onto the Workplane, and you let go, it simply drops right there. Now I want to bring you over to this section here. This is the view cube, and we're going to cover the view cube and every single one of these options here, what they do and why they exist. So with the view cube, what you can do is you can select any one of these blue regions. So for instance, if I select top, it brings me to a bird's eye view. Then I could click these arrows and then it goes to the right. I click the arrow again, it goes to the back. Also, if I press any of these blue regions here, like this is the corner between top, left, and front, it'll bring me to that corner. If I bring it to the side that's adjacent to top and front, it'll just bring me to that vantage point. And so this is very helpful. Now some tips. What you can do is you can hold down your left click on your mouse, and once you're on the view cube, you can simply just toggle it like that. And if you're curious, when you're doing this, this is actually called orbiting. And we can achieve orbiting with the mouse. We can simply right click the mouse and move around the mouse, and you will see that it orbits around. Now there's something called panning. This is very helpful. The way you can achieve panning is if you hold down Shift and then you hold down the right mouse click and then move around, you will see that you are not orbiting. It is stationary, yet if you move left and right, up and down, it pans. This can be very helpful. So for instance, if we're on the top view, but I want to move over to this cylinder, I can simply press down Shift, right click the mouse, and then move it over, and it does it seamlessly. Now, another way to achieve that on the mouse is you can hold down the wheel of your mouse. So the center of your mouse, the wheel thing, you hold it down, and that will also achieve panning. Now let's discuss zooming. Zooming is quite simple here. At any point in time, you can select this plus or minus, and this will simply zoom in. The more times you click it, the more it zooms in. And then the more times you click to zoom out, it zooms out. An additional way to zoom in and out is just to hit the plus or minus on your keyboard or to use the scroll feature on your mouse, and that will zoom in and out. Now bear in mind, it's just zooming in into the center point. This is a good time to bring up this fit all in view. What does this mean? Well, let's say we're working here, but I really want to be working on this sphere. What I can do is I can select the sphere, and then I could go to Fit View to selected shapes, and you could see that it goes to this shape. And then if I orbit around, it is hovering around that shape. This is very helpful because if we want to do some operations to the bottom of the shape, or we want to manipulate the sides or the top, this is an excellent feature. Now here's something really, really cool that you can also do. If we go over here and we select the basketball, and then we want to select two items at once, what we can do is we can shift click and select the blue ball as well, and you will see that it selects both of these items, ignoring the cylinder. So now if I zoom in and I click fit view, you will see that it really pays attention to these two objects here. It doesn't really pay attention to the cylinder. And by the way, a helpful tip, if two objects are selected or multiple objects, if you click anywhere outside of the objects, it will deselect the objects. This is important because it can get really annoying with some of these operations if you don't know this stuff. Now let's say you're zoomed in on the cylinder because you've been working on the cylinder, but now you want to see all the objects. You can select the fit all in view or simply click F on your keyboard, and you will see that it will then take you to see all three objects. Now, another thing that I want to point out here is this home view. This is a very, very helpful feature in Tinkercad because a lot of times you'll be zoomed in and working on the details of an object, and then you get lost. Like something like this happens and you're like, oh boy, where am I? I'm inside a basketball. This is trouble. You can simply select the home view and it will bring you home. Because trust me, when we work with multiple work planes and we start doing advanced stuff, sometimes you're just going to get lost. Just simply hit home view and you'll be back to home base. Think of it as the safety button, back to home base. And now this feature right here, switch to flat view orthographic. This is not really something that you will be using a lot, but I could tell you when this is helpful. Let's say I want to measure the distance between the basketball and the cylinder. It's very helpful to keep it in orthographic view versus perspective view. Perspective view is the way we see the world, right? Where things in front seem to be larger than things in the back. If you see right here, if I zoom out and we look at this ball, it looks so much larger than the cylinder. However, if I now go to the cylinder, it looks so much larger than the ball. But if I switch to orthographic view, we can actually see the size as it relates to the other objects, and it's not really thrown off because of your perspective or the way that we are used to operating and seeing the world. Now I want to cover a few different settings and snap grids that are really neglected when people talk about Tinkercad, but these are really, really helpful tools right here. So what is settings? Well, if you click on settings, some of these are obvious, but we'll go through them. If you change the background to say blue, and then you close the settings, you will see that it actually changes the background color. So this is just personal preference. I like to leave it white. The next thing for you to know in settings is these shadows. If you get rid of shadows, you will see that you no longer see the shadow of an object, but this is sometimes helpful. Again, it's that thing about perspective view that a lot of times when we're working with CAD, we want to see the things in CAD as we're used to seeing in the real world. It'll help us. The show grid, if we get rid of the grid, it actually gets rid of the work plane and the lines. You don't want to do that. I don't think there's ever a reason to do it unless you want to take a screenshot and show someone what you created, and you don't want that annoying work plane there. And we will get to work planes in a separate tutorial video. So I will toggle show grid on and show shadows. Cruise when adding new shapes. This is something I really want to talk about. Now look at what happens when it's selected to on. If we drag out, let's say a cylinder here, you will see that when it comes close to this other cylinder, it actually allows us to place it on the surface of that cylinder, whether it be on the side or the top. So if you're trying to stack things, this is a very, very helpful tool. Look, even on the basketball, you could place this anywhere on the surface. Imagine that you want to write your name on this cylinder. Well, you can select the letters and then place them onto the cylinder. Make it very, very easy. Before, this feature wasn't there. So one of the reasons you might want to have it off is because you're trying to achieve something like this. So check this out. If I turn off the cruise feature and then I move over this cylinder, now it goes inside the shape. So let's say I wanted to create a figure 8 out of cylinders, then I could simply do this and this looks like a figure 8. However, if cruise was selected on, there is no way that I would be able to achieve that, because all of a sudden it starts going to the surface. And remember, this is only for when adding new shapes. So let's go ahead and delete that. Now, if we go to settings and we take a look at zoom speed, if we select the speed to fast, check out what happens. If we zoom in, it zooms in rather fast. And if we go back and we select it to slow and we close the settings, you will see that now it's less sensitive. I really have to scroll or plus the plus a bunch of times in order for it to zoom in. I think it's just fine in the middle. If you're working on something very detailed, you might want to make it slow. The units, self-explanatory. If you're working in millimeters, inches. Now remember that this is all relational. When you input this into the software of your 3D printer, it's not really going to focus on if it's millimeters or inches. It just pays attention to the shapes relative to one another. However, what you can do in Tinkercad, which is amazing, is you can go to the presets and you can actually select the 3D printer that you have. And if you don't see yours here, you just figure out how big the bed plate is of the 3D printer, and you can go ahead and specify it here. So for instance, if I was working with the Ultimaker 2 Plus, I simply select it, and now watch what happens. It will adjust the Workplane to be the same amount of millimeters as the bed plate of that 3D printer. And that is amazing. It could be very, very helpful if you're working with a specific 3D printer. Now you can also specify the width and the length, and you can make it custom. So these are your workspace settings. Very, very important to know. Now take a look at the snap grid here. This is also super, super important. What does snap grid mean? Well, we're working in millimeters here. Let's say we select it as 1 millimeter. So if I go to this cylinder and I press the left key, you will see that it's moving by just 1 millimeter. And this right here specifies this square is exactly 1 millimeter in length. So watch, it moves over just by 1 unit. However, if I change the snap grid to, let's say, 5, now you'll see that it moves a lot faster. So let's go ahead and zoom out and look at this. When I press right or left, it moves a lot faster. Now, another thing that we can do over here is we can select it to be very, very minor. So 0.1 millimeters. This means that you will literally have to press it a lot of times in order to achieve it to go anywhere. So take a look here. In order to go across that square, I have to press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then it's finally there. And so if you're working with a really, really detailed design and that's important to you, rather than freehand it and try to select it and move it around, we'll get into movement in a second. What you can do is you can set the snap grid to a certain place, and you can specify exactly how sensitive it is to movement. And obviously, if you turn the snap grid off, now it's all freehand. And if we zoom in here, we can really even get even more detailed with it, honestly. See how before we only had 10 options within each square, but now it seems like those options are infinite because I can move it just a tad bit and it will do that exact movement operation. Now let's talk about some of these features up here in the top left corner. So what this is right here, the undo and Control Z, it's like anything else. When you click undo, it will undo the last operation that you did. And then redo is Control Y, which it will redo whatever you just undid. Now, if we take a look here and we select, let's say, the basketball, what we can do is we can actually copy it and then paste it. And if that happens, it simply drops it onto the Workplane, and then you can just move it around wherever you want. You can resize it, and we'll get into all that later. Shape manipulation, moving, rotating, scaling. We're going to do all that, and I'll show you all the tips and tricks. But what I really want to show you here is something very, very cool. There is a feature here called duplicate. Now, what does duplicate do? Well, I'll show you that you can create a spiral staircase in just a few operations. So watch this. And again, in future videos, I'm going to explain exactly what I'm doing here and how it's done. But let's say I create one step here, and then I select duplicate. Now I just duplicated it. I'm going to bring it up a little. I'm going to move it over to the side, and I'm also going to rotate it. And if we take a look, that's pretty much accurate to what I want. Now take a look at what happens here. If I select duplicate, it actually remembers the relational distance to the other one, and it keeps duplicating it in that fashion. And I will explain this in detail later on, but I just want to point out to you how amazing these programs are, how powerful they are, that in a matter of less than a minute, we created an entire spiral staircase. And this is going to teach you to look differently at the world. The entire world, it's all just shapes that are manipulated, shapes added to shapes, shapes subtracted from shapes, and any physical object you see, it can absolutely be replicated identically by adding shapes and subtracting shapes. Ever see an ice sculpture? Just a big block of ice, and then there's shapes taken away from it, and all of a sudden it becomes an incredible sculpture. It's the same way for any object, whether it's your face, your clock, the desk you're sitting at, the computer, it doesn't matter. It can all be designed. Any physical object, it's just shapes added to shapes and shapes subtracted from shapes. And this right here, this is just trash. So remember, if you select anything, so let's say we want to select the whole thing, we would have to go and you could hold down left click and just select every single object that's here, and you will see that it all gets a blue halo, which means it was selected. And by the way, I want to point this out because it's very, very important. If you have another object here, you may think that if you select, so let's see the top or bird's eye view, if you select just this, you may think that only the spiral staircase will be selected. However, if it's touching another object, it's going to unfortunately select all of it, including this. So watch out for touching other objects when you are using the selection tool. Another really neat shortcut that I want to point out is if you select any object, you hold down Alt, and then you simply drag the object, it's going to drag a duplicate out of it. So again, if I select this object and I start dragging it out, it's dragging out another one of the same exact object. This is very, very useful depending on what you are trying to design. Now, I want to point out that it's not going to work on the spiral staircase if you simply select something, like let's say I just select these couple, and then I hit Alt and drag it out. You will see that we're only dragging out what was selected. And this is because it was not yet grouped, ungrouped, and all of these operations here, which we will cover in a separate video. But what I do want to point out is on any object, you could select it. If you click delete on your keyboard, it will remove it, or you can just simply click this trash can. Another cool feature that didn't used to be there before is this notes feature right here. And again, I will cover all of this in a separate video, the Workplane tool, the ruler tool, all the tips and tricks that you need to know. But if you drag out this note right here and you drop it anywhere, you can actually write a note. Like you could say Robert's box. And this is very helpful because then you could simply hide the note's visibility, Shift N or this button right here. And if you want to recall, oh, whose box was this or whose design was this, you can simply turn it on and you will see that, oh, this is Robert's box. Okay, then I could X out. Why is this helpful? Maybe you're working on a design with a couple of people and they all chose their favorite color. Again, we'll cover this, how to add colors, how to shape, manipulate, and all that in a separate video. But let's say you wanted to add a note that this is Stephanie's box. So Stephanie's box, and what's really, really cool is then you could hide these, and then if you come back to this design, you're like, which one was which? You could simply select it and you could click on the different notes. And this is a really cool feature, and I love that Autodesk keeps updating the platform. And also Autodesk is the creator of Fusion 360, which I use as well, and it's the best platform out there. Architects use it, engineers use it, it's amazing. And this is like the beginner, super entry level form of that program. So if you get really, really good at Tinkercad and you learn everything here, it's not a waste of time because you can apply that knowledge later on to the Fusion 360 models or any intermediate models that they come out with. Now, the last thing I want to show in this tutorial is how to move certain objects. So if you select an object by clicking it and then you click on the left or the right and it's not moving, it is because your snap grid is off. So make sure it's on to like 1 millimeter or whatever setting you wish to have it on. And then what you can do is you can simply press the left key or the right key and it will move. You can select it and you can drag it. So this is another very, very important operation that you need to know. And additionally, if you hit this cone here, you can lift it up and down. So between moving it side, front, back, and up and down, we basically covered all the ways that you can move it. Now look at how helpful this thing is right here. When we selected it and we were moving it up and down, it actually told us how high up off the ground that is. And we could input another number here, like 25 millimeters, and it will move it exactly 25 millimeters up. So if there's another object here, and suppose we selected it and it was 25 in height, and we will talk about manipulating shapes in a separate video, but if you wanted to stack it exactly on top, you can see that if we move it on top, it is exactly on top of it because this object is 25 millimeters tall and this one is exactly 25 millimeters off the ground. So they may as well just be on top of each other. But keep in mind that sometimes this program can get a little bit weird when you are moving objects, and that's why there's really helpful tools like the align tool and other tools that we'll cover in a separate video. Now, another thing that I want to point out here is if we just go left and right, remember when I said it just moves on this specified number here, which is 1 millimeter, so left, right, up and down. But if we hold down Shift and then we move it up and down, you will see that it goes 10 times the move step. And this is really, really important to know because if you are doing Shift and left, you're saving yourself time by moving 10 millimeters at a time instead of 1 by just clicking left and right. And if you're just using the keyboard, another shortcut is Control or Command and then up and down, and you will see that it then lifts it up off the ground like a magician doing some elevation technique. So now's a great time to fill you in on a little secret in Tinkercad. When you're designing, a lot of times you're going to have things that are lifted off the ground. They look like they're levitating. These objects can be dropped directly to the work plane by trying to eyeball it and just bring it all the way down. Or you can even select 0 right here and that should bring it down to the surface. But a really, really neat trick that I like to do is when an item is lifted off of the work plane, at any point in time, if you select on the item and then you press on your keyboard D, it will drop it to the work plane. And this is super helpful. And another important thing that I want to mention is this rotate function here. So remember, when we select a specific object, there's going to be these right here. They're like semicircle arrows, and this is to rotate the object. If I hold this down, and I actually want to zoom in so you guys see this carefully. So this is really important to note. If I'm on the inside over here and I move it to the right, it's moving at 22.5 degrees each movement, nothing in between. If I go to this blue area, you'll see same thing. However, if I extend out, now you'll see that we can really specify the exact amount. And this can be very helpful. This could be confusing. If you're inside, you're like, what the heck? I can't be precise with it. Just simply go to the outside and you will be able to. And by the way, you can always simply select it and specify -44 and it will do it for you. Or you can even be more exact, such as -42.5, and it will do it at exactly -42.5. Now it only goes over one decimal place, so you can't do like -42.6789, but honestly you'll never have to do that, so I don't know why you would want to. And then up here it has further rotation. So between these three axes that you can rotate on, you can basically manipulate this shape any which way you please as far as rotation goes. And this can be very, very helpful, especially if you're building a figurine and you need to attach things to it. This is a very, very helpful rotating feature in Tinkercad. So I really hope that you guys learned something today, and just keep in mind that I will be making future tutorials and we're going to cover all of these. The Workplane tool that didn't used to exist before, the Cruise tool up here, and there's a whole lot of new shapes, new features, new things to be done in Tinkercad. It's an exciting time. Thank you, Autodesk, for creating such an amazing product. and making it free for everybody to use, educators, students, enthusiasts, and professionals. It's amazing, and I love these like open source platforms that just anybody can use. They're not hidden behind any type of paywall, and that's the way that I believe that things should be. So I appreciate you guys for watching this video in its entirety, and I will see you all in the next one.